Hey there everybody, this is Ann and welcome back to Painting Babe. Today we are going to dive into our non-metallic metals tutorials. I'm going to start with the simplest thing that I usually recommend new painters to NMM start with, which is going to be a simple sword. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, we are starting with a generic orc. Yes, generic orc. Here we go. And I honestly like the Reaper orcs for this stuff. They're pretty simple and they've got varied metal components. So for this one, we'll be able to practice the sword. We could practice a bit of shield. We can definitely practice chainmail. All that's really handy. There's also this metal plate here, which is kind of an odd shape. And then we've got the helmet. So there are a lot of pieces of metal on here that we can practice on. So the first thing with NMM is the colors. And what I am using here is 4 colors together. This is, well, first of all, let's start with our base coat. The base coats here are going to be cloudy gray. I've also added in a little bit of carbon gray to darken it. I could have just used stormy gray, but carbon gray really adds a lot of coverage, so I kind of like this mix just a little bit better. And then this is bits of this carried over and then 2 drops of white added. Now, also added to both of these, you can see a little hint of it maybe on the upper part of there, is blue. When you do NMM, especially steel NMM, if you just use a flat gray, it can look very artificial and weird and like it's not really in the world, almost like a pencil drawing. It's just really weird. So it's recommended that you put a little bit of color into your steel. Now for an orc, I could absolutely have used like a brown or something to make it look more grungy, but I tend to like to just make the metal slightly bluish, like sky reflection, so I decided to go with my standard color. Ashen blue is my favorite for this sort of thing, so that's what I used. And then we've got pure white. Here we have my shadow color, and that is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be gray liner. I also mixed a little bit of my base coat into that mixture. I'm going to darken this just a little bit down. I mixed the base coat in because gray liner by itself is very dark and very different from our base. If we want to layer with it, we want it to blend in a little bit better. Adding a little bit of my base coat into it is a helpful thing to do. So that's our colors. This is going to be our shadow. This is going to be our mid base. This is going to be our light base or highlight. And this is going to be our highest highlight. With non-metallic metal, you always go up to white. The exceptions are if you are using a specific color of light that's very different. Like if you're painting something like it's during the golden hour, or you're painting something under like a blue light source or something like that, then you would go up to that color plus white, most likely. But in order to make something look shiny, you really, really need that white hit. So what we're going to do here, and you can kind of see it actually, you can see it even with the zenith priming. We're going to look at what the direction of the weapon is in regard to the light source. So the easiest thing to do, and the reason I zenith prime this, is just to imagine your light source is diffused and from above. So that's the direction the primer came in. We can see then that this face of the weapon on the top is facing more upward. That means because it's more directed toward the light, we are going to paint it a lighter color. So we're going to take our light gray and just paint the top of that. This section is more perpendicular to the light. So we're going to take our mid gray and we're going to base coat it with that. Remember that our mid gray is a little bit darker because I did add a dark gray to it. Carbon gray is our charcoal gray, so it's cloudy gray plus carbon gray. So that's a good start, right? But it's very two-dimensional. So whether you go shadow or highlight is up to you. I tend to figure out where my strongest highlight is and then put a shadow under it. Sometimes though, if I'm like just in the mood, I'll put a shadow in first, especially if it's a darker metal. Here with you guys, I think I'm going to kind of mark where my light is. So if I look at the reflection of the light, if I kind of angle it and look, I can see that the light's really focused up here. So I'm going to dash in a bright light. I usually make this somewhat hourglass shaped. So you can see there, it's not just a bar, right? I'm kind of giving it a waist there. And that's so that I can extend it to run along the edges. And one of the tricks that a lot of European painters use is they will edge everything in white on non-metallic metal. And so we'll do that. You have to be real delicate about getting these center lines if you can't use the side of your brush. But just, you know, this is a good time to do it though, because you haven't done anything other than base coat. So if you mess this up, you can always grab a little bit of this or that color to kind of touch up the line. You'll just have to be careful not to totally wipe it out. You may need to touch it up later on. So here on this top of the blade, I can absolutely use the edge of my brush to do that white line. All right. So once we've got our highest highlight and we've kind of edged some of that, don't worry, we'll deal with the bottom edge in a bit. We have to put a dark shadow in. The thing that makes a non-metallic thing look shiny is contrast. It is the combination of a very bright white highlight with a dark shadow right next to it. Now, if we didn't have this angle here, or if it was a bigger, broader, rounded surface, we might blend between these two. But because we've got this angle, it's going to be more of a hard cutoff. So I'm going to put this dark shadow there, right under the white. And I'm going to extend that, just like I did there. I'm going to take a little bit of my base coat here and kind of blend these two together a little bit, kind of create a blend. Honestly, on steel NMM, I do find wet blending to be a very useful thing to do if you have the knack for it. You can look at my fundamentals of miniature painting video for kind of a demo on how I do it, but little small wet blends with a small brush are a lot easier than trying to do big ones, and it can really help you with transitions here where you're trying to go from black to mid-gray. You're essentially going black to white all on one surface, right? So, for example, I want to also bring a shadow up here onto this upper blade, but I don't want it to be as dark. So I'm going to kind of blend my dark color with my mid color instead. I'm going to put it down here, moving away. And I'll probably do another one right here. And what this does, it kind of like encapsulates this this shiny part, right, with a couple of shadows. It makes it stand out a little bit better. Now, in a lot of European technique, they're going to alternate and create different light and shadow reflections, right? So maybe they don't just want that one light. Maybe they decide maybe decide the light's coming through like a tree up above or something like that, where they've got a first and a secondary light. So maybe they'll do another little light down here to show that there's more going on, right? And then maybe I decide to get the tip really light here. So that's looking cool. So what about the underside? Now, there are two components to metal, right? There's shiny and there's reflective. So shiny means we want that light and dark contrast. And let's just actually do, when we do that, we want to put them opposite each other, right? But reflective means that we want to put also a reflected light on the bottom of here. We'll get to that in just a second. I want to put a little tiny secondary shadow right under this little secondary highlight. Just a little bit. And I want to darken down the one right under there, I think, just to make sure that it's the darkest shadow on here. Just right under there. All right, now that bottom edge of the blade is going to be reflective. And to start it out, we'll just do our white line. But I also want to lighten the area down on this flat part of the blade. So just that alone looks pretty cool, but we can do better than that. So we're going to take a little bit of our mid and our light, and we're going to layer in a little bit of lighter color in here. So I'm kind of taking this, and so just like I put a little bit of a shadow up here, I'm putting a little bit of highlight down here, right? But I'm blending it in a little bit. And whether there's abrupt transitions or kind of a blended effect usually depends on the finish of the metal. Chrome is going to have very abrupt transitions. You can see that regularly all around you in like car bumpers and and logo is when you're in traffic. But most weapons are not chrome bright, right? They're shiny, but they're more burnished. So you don't usually get a hard cutoff unless you've got something like this angle here, where the light is actively facing this side, but not this side. There you go, guys. So that is very simple, and honestly, we can even lighten the downside of this more than that. So the more light we bring in, and I'm not blending perfectly here, but I just want to show you guys. The more light we bring in, the more you can see that it's reflecting light, right, from the environment. Now you can choose to minimize your shadows a little bit. Like this shadow, I can take some of my medium gray and lighten it up a little bit at the bottom. Yeah, and then that looks pretty good. So there's ways we could make this better, but for a quick attempt to show you principles, I think this works pretty well. I'll just put a little bit more shadow up here. Thing is, I don't want the top part here to get totally away from being lighter than the underside, but I also want to get some of that kind of alternating lights and darks feeling to it. There we go. And yeah, you just, at that point, you just go back and forth. Remember though, you've got to have that really bright highlight. That's where the light is primarily hitting the blade. Maybe this is bounce light from a different object, or maybe there's like the light is interrupted coming from above. You don't know. But you want to keep your upper surface lighter in general than your undersurface. You want to put your dark shadows as on the opposing side or opposing direction from your your highlight. So if your light is going from above, then your shadow is going to be below those highlights, right? Whereas if the light was coming from the side, for example, if it was coming from the left, then the highlight would be here and the shadow would be on the right. So it's always an opposing shadow to your highlight, right? And again, when something is burnished, like if we were working on the helmet, then we'd probably be blending between these highlight and shadows, but because we have this edge here, we aren't doing that. So I can go and reaffirm my lower edge. This is a very simple NMM, but hopefully it has served to illustrate the principles for you. Highest highlight, darkest shadow, secondary highlight, secondary shadow, opposite the light source, lighter on the top, mid on the side that's pretty much perpendicular to the ground, and then white line highlights on all the edges to make it just look shiny. So there you go, everybody. That is a basic NMM sword and the principles laid out for you. In future videos, we're going to be doing stuff that's both more simple, like chainmail, and more complex, like shields and helmets. All right, I hope you're going to enjoy this series. I am really looking forward to it. And thank you so much for watching. Remember, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/paintingbig. I'm going to be recapping parts of this and laying it out in a short companion PDF for my $2 level. I always have one video a month that I do that companion PDF for at that very low price. And so if you're in the mood, you can go check it out. Thanks so much, and I'll be back at you next month. All right? This is Anne signing off.